All right, Tom Trento here once again on a beautiful Thursday afternoon, the 9th of October, 2014. 4.5 minutes, folks, after 4 p.m. on the East Coast. Welcome to the show. Enemies of the State is the name of our show. Man, do we have an enemy of the state for you today. We're going to discuss this very complex, very confusing issue of ISIS, ISIL, Islamic State, Al-Qaeda. What the heck is their name? Who are they? What are they doing? And with us today, and we're going to introduce her in a little bit, a very dear friend of the United West, a compatriot in the counter-jihad battle, Ms. Clare Lopez, who is currently the Vice President for Research and Analysis out of America's number one shop in Washington, D.C. that deals with national security issues, Frank Gaffney's Center for Security Policy. Claire is one of the scholars and analysts on board there. She also did a 20-year stint in the Central Intelligence Agency and comes with phenomenal scholarship and field operational experience. And the title for our show today, folks, and we want you to send this, call your friends right now. Tell them to listen to WSBR 740 on the AM dial in South Florida, or go to iHeartRadio. You can plug in WSBR 740 Boca Raton. Just plug that into search on iHeartRadio. It'll come right up on your smartphones because they're smart. That's why they're smartphones. Or you can go to, if you want to watch this, theunitedwest.org. So you may be driving in your car for the next 20 minutes or so. You want to get home. You can listen in the car. This is what I do. Put it on iHeartRadio, walk inside, then put it on theunitedwest.org and watch this. Once the show's complete at 5 p.m. on the East Coast, it stays on our website. You can send emails to all your friends to watch it because this 1-hour show will give you all you need to know right now on the 9th of October about the Islamic State. And the title for our show is The Islamic State, Historical Anomaly, Annihilation Force, or Escatological Reality. We're going to try to figure all of that out. And the best way to start it is to go to the Islamic State because these cats have superior media production capabilities. They are now producing high-end internet electronic magazines and highly produced videos. Take a look at this short video, which was one of their videos to launch their movement to establish a caliphate, global control of the world through this sort of media. Take a look at this.
رقاب بعض وعقر دار المؤمنين الشام.
From the Muhajirin, on the other hand, came the believers who would rebuild the Khilafah. They were chosen by Allah. They were the Ghuraba, the few of the few, from all corners of the world, who answered the call of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, go to Ash-Sham. They pledged allegiance to Amirul Mu'mineen, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, and through their efforts, Allah granted triumph to his religion. Thus, they began to record with their blood a new era of victory for the Ummah within the pages of history. They lied. By the grace of Allah, the Islamic State expanded into the land of Sham. As the ravenous flame continued spreading, roaring in hunger for the fuel of Nusayri blood, the flames in Iraq, meanwhile, continued their crawl, growing stronger, leaving the Americans in bewilderment, pondering what strategy to adopt in fighting the Islamic State. The reply from the White House was deceitful, as Obama was forced to respond to the rapid rise of the Islamic State.
To stop the advance on our bill.
That is a, man, oh man, that is a very strong piece of video. That's 1.5 minutes, folks, of a 50-minute promotional video by the Islamic State. And for those of you who were watching, the production values are superior. with graphics and lower thirds and background music, with a narrator that sounds like he's out of the Midwest, out of Chicago, certainly an English-speaking, fluent English-speaking jihadi. And this makes this Islamic State problem even more complex. But with experts, subject matter experts like Clare Lopez, coming in live by Skype from Washington, D.C., the Center for Security Policy. Hey, please welcome Clare Lopez. Let's give her a hand.
Hey, Claire.
There she is. Clare, how you doing today? How are you?
Hi, everybody. It's good to be with you.
You have been doing a tremendous amount of work on national security issues, on the Islamic Jihad, on Iran, on EMP, all of this. Just take a minute to establish the complexity, because we're going to unpack that complexity. The complexity, the average American, and we're like 25 days or so away from a midterm election. And here in Florida, we've got a battle going on, and national security is one of the issues they're arguing about. For the average voter, just establish the complexity of understanding the Islamic State, and then we'll deconstruct that through the course of our show, Clare.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Well, the Islamic State, newsflash, it actually is Islamic, and it also actually behaves and functions as a state. It's got its roots back in the 2000s when American troops were in Iraq, and other coalition members with us too, fighting against a guy, you might remember this name, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi. He headed up a terror group called Al-Qaeda in Iraq. Well, thanks to General David Petraeus and our brave fighting forces, he was killed in 2006, and the AQI forces were defeated. A bunch of them fled up into Syria, along with whatever was left of Saddam Hussein's top command structure. They found safe haven in Syria, and when the civil war in Syria broke out in 2011 against Bashar al-Assad, these guys were part of the opposition. They were part of the rebel forces. And they grew stronger in part because both Bashar al-Assad and his terror state sponsor, Iran, and Hezbollah that fights with them, kind of left hands off of these guys. They didn't go after them very much. So they grew, and they called themselves now Islamic State in Iraq and Al-Sham. That is the ISIS part. And the Al-Sham part is a reference to the old historic name for Greater Syria. It just means the southeastern littoral, the shore, of the Mediterranean Sea. That's what Al-Sham means. And it extends inland pretty much down into the beginnings, at least, of Mesopotamia. So ISIS starts to get strong. It's led by Iraqis, especially a scholar by the name of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi is a graduate, and he holds a doctorate degree from a university in Baghdad in Islamic studies. This guy knows Islam and Islamic law, and he knows what he's doing in terms of following Islamic doctrine. So
all right, let's hold it
he
right
leads
there.
this
Clear.
group. It gets big and strong. And then finally this year, June 2014, it sweeps down out of Syria back into Iraq from where it came and takes over a lot of territory. Cities fall. The Iraqi army falls back before it. Divisions drop their uniforms, drop their guns, and flee. And by the way, all that great top-of-the-line U.S. American-made equipment like tanks and APCs and artillery and everything else falls into the hands of ISIS.
Unbelievable.
They take a new name now. Now they call themselves the Islamic State. Because why? They've erased the border. They erased the border drawn in the Sykes-Picot Agreement of the early 20th century by British and French colonial forces. The border between what used to be Iraq, used to be called Syria, doesn't exist anymore. It's been unified under the Islamic State. Al-Baghdadi declared a caliphate. called himself the emir. He took a new name. He calls himself Caliph Ibrahim now, and he controls a great deal of territory and is driving to take more. Many of the Sunnis that were in this area, who live in this area, flocked to his banner, the black flag of Islam, because they were so marginalized and felt completely left out of the government we left behind in Baghdad, led by Shiites, dominated by Shiites. And the Sunnis are not all fighting to stay free of the Islamic State. They're joining it in droves. Now what we're seeing is a whole bunch of other militias and formerly Al-Qaeda groups and other jihadis from all over the world. As many as 70 or 80 countries are coming to join this entity. Wow. It's getting bigger and more powerful, but at the moment, the only territory that it actually has conquered or threatens are the territories of two Iranian puppet regimes, Baghdad and Damascus.
Wow. Not a bad immediate overview for the complexity of this situation. Why don't we put up the map that says Israel and Syria and Jordan for the viewers. And Claire, you can take a look at that map. And what we want to establish right now is the area we're talking about. And for the viewers out there, obviously you can see, and for the listeners, we have a map that shows Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Egypt, and little tiny Israel right over there, just south of Lebanon. By the way, if you're interested, March 21st of 2015, Frank Gaffney and I are leading a tour back to Israel, and the public is welcome to come. 2 years ago, Clare Lopez, who is our special guest today, came with the United West. We had a team of about 10 people, went to Israel, studied suicide bombing throughout the country, and we have been there, folks. We have traveled this ground. We have gone to these hot spots. We're going back March of 2015. We'll give you some information for that at the end of this show. But at 4:16 in the afternoon on a beautiful, beautiful fall day. It's not fall yet, I don't think, but it feels like that out there in Florida. On October 9th, we welcome Clare Lopez as our special guest. Clare, let's put up the map that shows the area that the Islamic State has under control. It's called ISIS control. If you can look at that one, Clare, and just take 30 seconds to point out some of the geography you just sketched out. Then I want to go into the 3 publications, the Dabiq publications by the Islamic State.
Sure. Well, you know, you've heard a lot of sort of different ways to reference this group. You hear ISIS, Islamic State in Iraq and al-Sham. And in fact, that is the accurate term before it shortened it to Islamic State, because in the Arabic language, the direct acronym that corresponds to ISIS, Islamic State in Iraq and al-Sham, is Daesh, Dolat-e Islamiyya fi al-Iraq wa al-Sham. And so the ISIS is an actual direct translation of the Arabic Daesh. I don't know why some people, especially in the administration, continue to use ISIL. Levant is an interesting term, but it's not the term that's used by the entity itself. So
hang on one second, Clare. Hey, Clare, hang on one second. We're going to put up the map. I think you have it, called the Levant Caliphate. And if our viewers can take a look at the screen, and the listeners can understand what's going on, I have heard that some of the experts say that the administration uses the term ISIL simply to identify the Levant there, to include that little country called Israel. Look at that, Clare. What are your thoughts on why the administration may use the Levant?
Well, I mean, actually, the term al-Sham includes the exact same geography as anybody would use when they use the term Levant. It's the exact same geography. It runs from the Mediterranean shores of Turkey on down south. Sometimes they'll take it as far as Egypt. And there's a question about whether the island of Crete in the Mediterranean is included or not included. But Crete aside, the territory of the Levant is exactly the same geographical territory as Al-Sham, Greater Syria. Another distinction might be how far down into Mesopotamia, that would be what used to be called Iraq, the geography extends. But there's no difference between Al-Sham and Levant. It's the same thing.
All right, now for our audience, for our viewers and listeners, and they're not familiar with all these terms and all that, but they know a beheading, Clare Lopez, when they see it. They know when American citizens get beheaded. They know when somebody in Oklahoma gets beheaded by a jihadi. And that has awakened Americans to something's going on in our teaching moment here on our show, Enemies of the State. I'm Tom Trento, your host. Clare Lopez is our guest at 20 minutes after 4 o'clock in the afternoon on WSBR. What term do you think ought to be used most accurately, most academically, most historically, most effectively right now when referring to this entity that is trying to take over Kobani, right now a Syrian town on the border of Turkey? What term should we be using?
I would simply use Islamic State. It's short. It's descriptive of what this is, what it calls itself. Let's not quibble about the terms. It's an Islamic State. It aspires to be a caliphate. We'll see if it yet gets to that level of allegiance across the Muslim Ummah, across the world of Muslims. But I think Islamic State will do for now.
All right, and that's what we here at the United West have been calling it virtually from day one, only because our view is if you're going to be fighting an enemy, let's name the enemy, if that's what they call themselves. And I've heard a different view. You know, let's not credit them with that name. I think, as you do, we ought to call them the Islamic State. They are Islamic. I'm going to ask you in a second why the President of the United States stood on his soapbox and argued and worked as an apologist, as somebody like John Esposito would, to say the Islamic State wasn't Islamic. And on the state component, we have found in their own writings and their own behavior that they are trying to develop a social structure. They have a jurisprudential system called the Sharia in place. We may not agree with it, but they have a judicial system in place. They have a welfare system in place. They are building schools. They are providing food and water to people. They're doing what a state does, but herein lies a serious conundrum for the rest of the civilized world, indeed for the rest of the 200 countries in the world. Do we ever recognize them, that's rhetorical right now, as a state that doesn't recognize state borders, but they are functioning as a state? Why, Clare Lopez, did President Obama go out of his way to say the Islamic State was not Islamic?
Well, it's puzzling. I mean, just as you say, Tom, the Islamic State is obviously, in its behavior, the purest expression of Islam for many a decade. I mean, you'd have to go back to the origins, perhaps even of the Ottoman Empire, to find an expression of Islam as pure as the Islamic State. The only people who would deny what they are doing are those who either are unfamiliar with the Islamic texts, the Quran, the Hadiths, the Sunnah, that include the Hadiths and the Sirat, the biography of Muhammad, and the law, Islamic law, Sharia, or they seek to deny those things and pretend that they don't have anything to do with what the Islamic State is doing, which is rather foolish, because it's you could hold open on your lap practically a copy of the biography of Muhammad, and you know every biography we have that's come down to us is essentially based on the original first one by Ibn Ishaq. You open that up in front of you, and you could almost turn the pages and say, okay, they did that. Okay, they did that. Okay, now that. Amputation, beheading, crucifixion, execution of prisoners, sexual slavery, slavery, period. All of these things are straight out of the life of Muhammad. As it is told to us, it is recounted and believed by Muslims. Whether it's actually a historical fact, we'll leave aside. But that is the account that comes down to us and that Muslims believe. And those things, those horrific atrocities, human rights atrocities, are unfortunately to be found directly in the Quran. Beheading,
Clare,
verse 47:4.
Clare, that's
Crucifixion,
hang on, Clare.
verse 533. On and on we go.
Clare, that's the point of departure for a lot of Americans, and we need to address this on our show today. So far, folks, we've established that the Islamic State ought to be called the Islamic State. It's most historically accurate, academically accurate, philosophically accurate, theologically accurate, and in a little bit we're going to do a segment on the belief and behavior of the Islamic State leaders and warriors. But we want to address right now, Clare, this disconnect between the doctrine of Islam, which you just said the Islamic State is following in a pure, essential manner. They have taken the documents and they have said, we ought to emulate the Prophet Muhammad. We ought to emulate the true beliefs as written, as codified, as approved by Al-Azhar, as approved by the Fiqh Council, as approved by Reliance. We ought to emulate, follow, and implement this policy in our behavior. Well, that includes unbelievably and inhumane acts of devastating human beings, killing children, cutting their heads off, sticking them on poles. A Westerner psychologically cannot put together these two bits of information, that a religion would have a practice that was so inhumane and incomprehensible. Therefore, that can't be the true expression of the religion of Islam. Is there any logical fallacy in the way Ben Affleck would analyze this, Clare Lopez?
Well, unfortunately for Ben Affleck fans and the rest of Hollywood, the fellow hasn't a clue what Islam actually is. Unfortunately, the history, the doctrine as it has come down to us, the stories of the life of Muhammad as they are recounted and believed to be true by Muslims contain all of these horrific atrocities. I might mention right here, it's not all that distant, historically speaking, that these things have occurred. Coming up very shortly in April of 2015 is the 100-year anniversary of the Armenian genocide. The Armenian genocide carried out by Turks in the wake of and during World War I, the beginning of the 20th century that is, led to the slaughter of a couple million Armenians and others, Christians, Catholics, simply because they were not Muslim, because they believed in another faith, Christianity, Catholicism. It was jihad. It was done in the name of jihad. To this day, of course, the Turks will not admit it, but that anniversary is coming up, and that is the anniversary that is commemorated by the Armenian people. And we need to remember what happened then too, because what we're seeing now is an absolute replica. It is an echo. It is a repeat of the atrocities that occurred then. Everything we're seeing now, the beheadings, the amputations, the crucifixions, the slaughter of prisoners, the taking of women as sex slaves, all of that happened in the early 20th century by the jihad power of the day at that time, which was the Ottoman Empire, that then, of course, did go down to defeat in World War I. But this isn't new. This is simply now a repeat of everything that's gone before, but most recently, let's remember the Armenian people.
Yeah, and it's a very important point. 29 minutes after 4 o'clock on WSBR, AM radio, 740 on your dial, folks. Yes, we are back. We were on the air for almost 2 years on WNN 1470. That's the sister side of the Beasley Broadcasting Corporation. We're now on the other side of the dial, 7:40 a.m. That's where you can catch us every day, 4 o'clock East Coast time, or our website, theunitedwest.org, will be up and running. You'll watch the show live at 4 o'clock on www.theunitedwest.org. And if you guys can put the graphic up for our trip to Israel, if that's possible, on March 21st of 2015, the stuff we are talking about right now in the Middle East, the Syrian border, the Lebanese border, the Gaza situation, Egypt down south. We are going, myself and Frank Gaffney are leading, along with Yoram Ettinger, Ambassador Ettinger, who was on yesterday's show. We are leading a fact-finding mission to Israel to go to the hotspots. You can send us an email, tom@theunitedwest.org. We'll send you all the information. Trip cost about $3,000 for 10, 12 days. There's an extension to Eilat. In Eilat, we go to Petra, very cool place in Jordan. And you can start saving your shekels now, folks. And the stuff we're talking about, you can go walk, and we will be working with the Israeli Defense Force, with the Israeli intelligence folks. We will be talking to elected officials. When you come back from this 10, 12-day trip, you will have earned a degree in Middle East studies in the real world. We're going to talk to the warfighters who are fighting the jihadis. We're going to look at the northern border and see the extreme situation, the tense situation that's occurring there. But don't be afraid. Israel's an extremely safe place, and much safer, as Ambassador Ettinger said yesterday, than walking along the streets of Chicago on any weekend. So, Claire, you just established that the Armenian devastation by Muslims right during World War I is essentially the same behavior the Islamic State is implementing today, but there were no cell phones. There were no immediate communication capabilities back then to inflame the sensibilities of the world. It took time for this stuff to leak out. Right now, Claire, I want to talk about the media capabilities of the Islamic State regarding their magazines, Dabiq. What is your analysis of those magazines?
Well, sure. Like Al-Qaeda before it, the Islamic State also has begun to publish a series of online, very slick, English language, full color magazines. It's now up to 3 issues. The third one came out, I think, in the summertime, late summertime. And the interesting thing about these is how they lay out for us exactly what the beliefs are of the leadership of the Islamic State, what they intend to do, and why they're doing it. And I'm looking on my own screen, my own computer right now at a shot of the 3rd issue. It's called A Call to Hijrah. As your viewers might know, Tom, of course you do, Hijrah was the journey by Muhammad and the early Muslims, as is recounted at least in the history, when he moved from Mecca, where his message had not been accepted, to Medina, then called Yathrib, and there began to grow stronger as a military force. So this issue, number 3 of Dabiq, is called A Call to Hijrah. It means that they're calling Muslims from all over the world, faithful, devout Muslims who want to put jihad into practice, to come to Syria, to come to Iraq, and join the forces of the Islamic State. It's very reminiscent, by the way, of Abdullah Azzam, sometimes called the godfather of Al-Qaeda, who wrote a similar kind of an essay back during the Afghanistan War of the 1980s, and he called it Join the Caravan. It's very similar, and I think it's probably meant to be reminiscent of that piece by him. But in any case, what's interesting about this particular issue, I think, is that it lays out the Islamic State objectives of consolidating its power now, the territory it's conquered, which is quite a bit of what used to be Syria, used to be Iraq, consolidating that, establishing the caliphate. In reality, as you said, Tom, it's governing already. It's providing the water, the fuel, the electricity, the food. It controls 40% of Iraq's wheat production right now, among other things. It's got oil wells for income, even after some of those have been struck with aerial bombardment. But this issue of Dabiq, I want to point out one thing in particular, and it is the first article in the piece, and it is called "The Islamic State Before Al-Muhammad."
Okay.
That word, Al-Muhammad, we would translate that as Armageddon. So what they're talking about is the battles of the end times that they think about in their eschatology that would lead to the final day of judgment. This is where this goes. And they're calling Al-Muhammad the battles of Armageddon, in other words. By the way, the name Dabiq of the magazine itself refers to a town in northwestern Syria by that name called Dabiq, where the leadership of the Islamic State believe the final battles will be fought, the final battles of Armageddon. You'll see some overlap here, obviously, with Christian eschatology too, the end times. But this is Islamic. And so what they are doing in this issue is not only calling the forces of Islam, all the devout, practicing Muslims of the world, able-bodied to come and fight, but they're also calling on the West. With the beheadings, with these atrocity videos, they are doing everything they can to call on the forces of the West to lure us back into ground battle in this territory that they now control, they call the caliphate. And the battles of Armageddon cannot be fought except between ground troops of Islam and what they would call the Crusaders, or in this issue of Dabiq, they call them the Romans, but that means the Westerners, the Crusaders, the Westerners. They desperately, desperately want America and other Westerners to put ground troops into battle with them so that they can play out the rest of their end times eschatology.
Wow, Claire, you just interjected. Ben Affleck, hey guys, Ben Affleck's head must be exploding right now.
Right.
You know he listens to this show every day.
Showed up on radar.
Yeah, I think you might so.
Yeah.
His head must be exploding. Clare Lopez. Oh, what do you know? Something about Islam, Clare Lopez?
Right.
Ben would be asking her that. Claire just interjected in, and you remember the title for our show today, Historical Anomaly, Annihilation Force, or Eschatological Reality. Eschatology, folks, simply the study of the end times. The Jewish scriptures have a doctrine of end times, the Christian scriptures do, and the Islamic scriptures do. Claire just interjected into that, and there on your screen is the explanation of the eschatological reason why they chose to name the Islamic State, their magazine, Dabiq. Claire just interjected into this study an apocalyptic theocratic component. Now, I know Westerners' heads are exploding along with Ben, but the question is, and Claire's work is in the analysis of the enemy, is this the way they really think? Do they really believe this stuff? If they do, ought not we understand that? And there's implications for what we as the West and what Israel, as the lone survivor in that Mideast conundrum there, what Israel ought to be doing. Claire, let's shift gears a little bit now and delineate some of the beliefs and the behaviors. In the past 30 minutes or so, it's 39 minutes after the hour now. 39 minutes after 4 o'clock on the East Coast, 39 minutes after 1 o'clock To our friends in California and outlying western areas, Tom Trento, WSBR, live AM radio from Miami to North Palm Beach, live everywhere in the world on the internet, iHeartRadio, WSBR 740 AM out of Boca Raton, or theunitedwest.org. Clare, let's break down 2 or 3 essential beliefs. If we had to get inside the heads of the Islamic State, folks, we've established from now on, forget about ISIS, forget about ISIL. It's the Islamic State. Use that nomenclature in your discussions with people. Let's get inside the heads of the Islamic State leaders and fighters. What are their core beliefs? What's their Weltanschauung, their worldview, Clare? Take a minute or two to sketch that out.
You know, let's go back to something I mentioned earlier on, and that is the leadership figure, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, or as he likes to be called now, Caliph Ibrahim, has a doctorate in Islamic studies from a university in Baghdad. So this is not an ignorant camel jockey. This is a senior scholar of Islam. Now, you can say Islam is nuts. You can say this is all bonkers. Okay, fine, but this is what they believe. And that means that this is the enemy threat doctrine that we face, right or wrong. This is what we're up against because they do believe it, and they do base what they believe on the Islamic canon, the scriptures, the doctrine. I want to mention one other thing here. I think this might be a good point to pull this in about the grounding of this belief, the reality of this belief. I want to refer your viewers, Tom, to an article that was published in Der Spiegel magazine. This is a German publication online, but it's in English, in 2005. Okay, that means 9 years ago.
Wow.
A Jordanian journalist scored an interview with a senior leader of Al-Qaeda, Saif al-Adil. He's the one that headed up the military command of Al-Qaeda inside of Iran. By the way, that's where Khorasan comes from too. His unit inside Iran, that's where Khorasan is from. But they got this interview, and in the interview, this Al-Qaeda leader laid out the 7 phases for the triumph of the caliphate. Okay, now I won't go through all 7, but they're listed, they're enumerated by date. Okay, let me just start with the 4th phase.
Okay.
Between 2010 and 2013, Al-Qaeda will aim to bring about the collapse of the hated Arab governments. We had a little something in that period of time. A lot of people still kind of like to call the Arab Spring. That was the Al-Qaeda plan to bring down the secular rulers of the Arab Muslim world who were not keeping Sharia, not enforcing Sharia. That's why they had to go. They went down. That was phase 4. Okay, now we're in phase 5. What does phase 5 say? 2013 until 2016. This will be the point at which an Islamic State or caliphate can be declared. Okay, now remember,
wait, Clare,
this is
what was the dates? Put that
9
Mark.
years ago in English, laid out for us on the internet. Let me just mention quickly phase 6, and that is from 2016 onwards, there will be a period of total confrontation. In other words, the end times battles. Okay, this is what Al-Qaeda laid out 9 years ago. Are they on target time-wise or what?
This is
Now, this is not just Al-Qaeda, obviously. The belief in the end times, the belief in the day of judgment, the final day of judgment, the return of what they call the Mahdi, the Islamic messianic figure, all of that is deeply held belief by devout Muslims all over the world, and obviously by the leadership of IS. But this is how they're thinking, and this is the timetable that they're working on.
Wow. It's almost inconceivable, and we're very familiar with that document and this timeline. It's almost inconceivable in today's world to say, written in 2005, what, 9 years ago is that? To say this is going to work out virtually exactly within those time frames. They're not centuries. In the 22nd century, we'll do this. They have 3-year time periods. Somebody put a lot of thought, obviously, into that and figured out ways to make that happen. Shocking. All right, so what we're doing now, folks, at 44 minutes after 4 o'clock on the East Coast, WSBR AM radio, 740 AM. On the internet, worldwide, Tom Trento with our special guest, Clare Lopez. She's the Vice President of Research and Analysis, Research and Development for Frank Gaffney's National Security Shop, Center for Security Policy. Our subject today is the Islamic State. Is it a historical anomaly? You know, these bizarre thug groups come along all the time in history. In 1938, we had some folks in Germany rise up, and the West rose up to crush them. Is it some sort of anomaly like that, a fascist anomaly? Is it an annihilation force simply out there to annihilate people? Or is this some sort of escatological reality that we're facing? Let's touch a little bit on the psychology of the warfighter in the Islamic State, Clare. We understand they're following the doctrine of Islam, which is comprised of several books. And we understand there's a timeline for their warfighting methodology. But let's put, you know, where the sword meets the flesh. How do you take an 18-year-old kid who was in Lebanon or in Yemen? He sees the excitement, the grandeur, the romance of the Prophet Muhammad, of Saladin, on the horses, on their camels, fighting the Crusaders, fighting the evil West. He travels into Turkey. Then they get him over into Syria. He joins the Islamic State, and he's given weapons to fight. And then he's asked, Clare, to behead a 10-year-old kid who happened to be a Christian or a non-Muslim, an infidel. And this 18-year-old young man beheads a young kid. What is going on psychologically in the mind of that 18-year-old?
You know, I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist. It's difficult for people like us who, you know, live in the security of a free Western society to understand this kind of devotion and belief in an ideology. But there's no way they could perform acts like those without that deep Islamic devotion that's been instilled in them. In many cases, whether they grew up in the West or the Middle East, it's been instilled in them, the devotion, the zealotry, since childhood. They heard this in their families. They heard it at mosque. They heard it at madrasa classes from the Quran. It's obviously not going to be every fighter that goes over there that's going to be doing these things. They don't. And it's certainly not every Muslim who even grows up hearing such things or listening to such passages at Friday sermons in the mosque that will take that next step of devotion to jihad and actually participate in such atrocities. The vast majority of Muslims the world over want nothing to do with any of this. But the problem is that a certain small subset who grow up with this, who are ingrained with it, or even, as we've seen unfortunately now in our own country, in Moore, Oklahoma, who convert to this later in life, perhaps in prison, as Anton Nolan did. A certain small subset who will find themselves so moved, so driven by devotion, by a zealous desire to follow in the footsteps of Muhammad and do what Muhammad did, as told in the biography, that they will become capable of doing things like such atrocities. But again, horrific as it is, this is a small subgrouping, but the problem is that the larger population of Muslims around the world actually are not capable. They are irrelevant, as Brigitte Gabriel put it a few months ago. to the larger issue of those that have this devotion. The majority have proven incapable or unwilling to stop the minority, which is many, many thousands strong. Let's not minimize it. It is thousands and tens of thousands strong. But even with that, the vast majority are not and never have been capable throughout history, and not just in Islam. Look at Stalin's regime, Hitler's regime, Pol Pot in Cambodia, Mao in China. It's always been a minority of true believers that carries on the ideology and performs these atrocities and mass slaughters. But that's enough.
That's
it's enough to get it done. And here again, we look to the history of Islam, and it's been this way throughout history for almost 14 centuries now.
And it's very important, ladies and gentlemen, listening at 50 minutes past 4 o'clock on the East Coast, Tom Trento, our special guest, Clare Lopez, Center for Security Policy. Very important to make the distinction between the Islamic State war fighters who are implementing the doctrines of Islam and many, many Muslims worldwide. And that's for another show, why the Muslims worldwide are irrelevant for the most part. But we don't want to, and we would be remiss if we didn't underscore the academic fact that the Islamic State fighters are the true believers. They are living out, notwithstanding Nihad Jihad Awad, the head of CARE out of Washington, and his recent press conference condemning the Islamic State on theological grounds they tried to. And that document has been deconstructed by people who understand what's going on and corrected. The Islamic State is indeed following the true beliefs of the Prophet Muhammad, their Prophet Muhammad, and Islamic doctrine. The Westerners, all of us listening here, have to understand, just because a majority of people are not following the doctrines of Islam, that doesn't mean the doctrines that the true believers are following are incorrect. Thus, the complexity of this issue psychologically, not logically, not militarily. We got a couple of questions from the guys over here. Real quickly, then I want to finish up, Claire, with what this means, the Islamic State threat to the United States and to Israel, and what we need to do about it. So, gentlemen, you got a question?
My question is for Claire.
That's Mark, Claire.
Hey, it's Mark, Claire. The people, the Hamas in Palestine, who've been fighting with Hamas, have you found evidence or in your research that they are leaving the Palestinian area and going to join ISIS? Because me and Tom have been talking, it's like, this is too much of an enticement for a young jihadi not to go to ISIS and not to flee up there because they're the same ideology. What are your thoughts on that? And have you found any evidence?
There's a lot to be said for success. And the more that the Islamic State can demonstrate its success in capturing towns, occupying, conquering territory, subjugating people. By the way, it's not just about killing people. It's about subjugating them to Islamic law. That's the objective, not just piles of skulls. But the more they demonstrate that success and seem to be on a roll, the more they are attractive to others around the world. And that's why I was saying before, you've got volunteers from 70, 80 countries now that have gone to Syria or Iraq and joined up with IS. You've also got some key elements of Al-Qaeda that have now pledged bayat or allegiance to the Islamic State. And these include Tariq-e-Taliban Pakistan, that is the Pakistani element of the Taliban. You have elements in Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb. You have very significantly the bomb maker from Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, AQAP, whose name is Ibrahim al-Asiri, this evil genius of a bomb maker, not only reported to have pledged allegiance to IS, but he's affiliated with AQAP to begin with. So you've got people joining as this thing moves on, and in part that's got to do with the image of success. Let's not forget, the reestablishment of a caliphate has been the dream
Right.
of Muslims all over the world ever since the last one was abolished in the wake of World War I in 1924. That's why the Muslim Brotherhood was formed, in part, to reestablish the caliphate.
But
It is,
yeah, doesn't this just blow off the liberal argument that the people in Hamas in Palestine are just protesters for a resistance movement? No, they are ISIS. They are joining ISIS in droves.
The Islamic State, not ISIS. The
Right.
Islamic State.
I don't actually know of how extensive the IS infiltration of Gaza might be just yet. There are reports that there is some infiltration there. Hamas certainly has not joined IS yet, but
Right.
their objectives are the same:
Right.
caliphate and Sharia.
Okay.
All right, Claire, we're starting to fight the clock here a little bit. We're going to have to do a second show to follow up to this. But right now, at 55 minutes after 4 o'clock, WSBR 740 AM in Boca Raton. Quick question: is the Islamic State Al-Qaeda?
Sure it is. I mean, it is the outgrowth, remember, of Abu Musab al-Zarqawi's Al-Qaeda in Iraq. It includes now many, many others, not just Al-Qaeda. But that's where it started. And again, objectives are the same. Jihad is jihad. The objectives are caliphate and Sharia. So even if you don't call it Al-Qaeda, the objectives, and here's the dividing line for Muslims: are they jihadis or are they not jihadis? IS are jihadis, so are Al-Qaeda, Hamas, Hezbollah, Shiite, Sunni. They're all jihadis.
Yeah, I think to nuance the Islamic State a bit, where there may be a distinction between Al-Qaeda, not philosophically, not fundamentally, but somewhat methodologically in their political construct. The Islamic State wants to be a state, whereas Al-Qaeda wanted to destroy the West, destroy Israel. They didn't really have a state-making capability to the degree, and this may be an argument of degree, that the Islamic State now has with the wealth from the oil fields. Let's talk for a moment about the threat, the existential threat. That word gets thrown around a lot. Existentialism, John Paul Sartre's delineation of existentialism, very simple: existence before essence. Don't figure out who you are, just exist and enjoy life. Existential threat today now means a threat to someone's existence. Is the Islamic State an existential threat to Israel and to the United States today?
No, it is not. At this particular moment, we are in October 2014. The Islamic State threatens physically the territories of two Iranian puppet regimes: Baghdad, that used to be Iraq; Damascus, that used to be Syria. The threat to the broader region may grow if IS continues to advance and grow, and eventually, yes, could take aim at Jordan, Saudi Arabia. Ultimately, Israel would certainly be its objective. But right now, its objective is consolidation of the territorial gains it's already made within that space. Now, the threat to the United States, no, it's not existential at all at this time. But the threat is real, and it has to do with jihadis with passports. Jihadis who travel and go across borders with passports or without passports across our collapsed southern border, and infiltrate our society to commit perhaps acts of individual jihad is what they would do. Small cells or individuals. And certainly somebody, like the Oklahoma beheader falls into the category of individual jihad, even though he never traveled anywhere except to prison, where he got himself converted to Islam. The Tsarnaev brothers in the Boston Marathon bombing last year, individual jihadis. They can do a great deal of damage and cause a lot of mayhem and death and injury. But this is not existential to the United States.
All right, we're going to have to do another show because we want to look at the Islamic State's desire to control the oil fields in Saudi Arabia and then squash the West economically that way. We need to follow up and figure out if we ought to be bombing the Islamic State, putting boots on the ground. So next week, we'll do a follow-up show with you, Clare Lopez. How's that?
That sounds good. And my last word would be support the Kurds. That's who we need to support. Every aid and assistance must go to the Kurdish people.
Support
to the Kurdish people. Okay. We will, part 2 of this series, folks, will be next week. We'll follow up what we should do to the Islamic State from the United States military point of view. For right now, hey, thanks a lot, Clare Lopez, for a very informative, educational, and motivating time together. We know our audience, viewers, and listeners worldwide enjoyed it. This is Tom Trento signing off for the boys over here, Damon, Mark, everyone else that's helping us. We'll see you tomorrow when we have Robert Spencer and Noor, the fellow who was one of the ones who outed the beheader at the mosque in Oklahoma City. Tom Trento signing off.